Sometimes the loneliest people sit in crowded places, hoping to feel less alone. The cafe sat quietly on a sleepy corner of New Haven, tucked between two aging brick buildings and a flower shop whose painted sign had begun to peel. The morning after a long rain had left puddles on the pavement, the air still damp and smelling faintly of earth and sugar. Drops clung to the cafe's awning, falling in slow rhythm to the sidewalk below. Inside, the world was warmer. Bursts of laughter from strangers, the hiss of steaming milk, the low hum of easy music. At a small corner table by the front window sat Rowan Thorne, a man whose name filled newspapers but whose soul had forgotten how to fill silence. In front of him rested an untouched cup of espresso, its surface now cool and filmed with gray. He sat very straight, as always. Tailored charcoal suit, shoes that reflected the light, gold watch peeking from a perfectly pressed sleeve. Everything about him whispered control, except the eyes. The eyes told another story. 2 days earlier, he had buried his mother, the only person who had ever looked at him like a person, and not a brand. People at the funeral had spoken in comforting phrases. How proud she'd be. What an accomplished son she'd raised. But every word had landed like paper against glass. Pride didn't fill the empty echo of her voice. He stared out through the condensation-streaked window, watching umbrellas blur past. He wasn't really watching them. He was watching absence. The city moved, the world kept turning, and he remained perfectly still. The cafe bell jingled when the door opened. A gust of cold air and the chatter of college students spilled in. Rowan didn't lift his head, but he felt their gazes. He always did. Recognition followed him like perfume. Respectful looks, muffled whispers. That's him. Rowan Thorne, the tech billionaire, the medical innovator, the genius who turned code into cures. He resented it. Or maybe he resented what it meant, that admiration was cheaper than understanding. 10 minutes more, he told himself. Then he'd escape back to his penthouse full of documents and silence. The sound of nobody asking how he was. Then came smaller footsteps, unsteady but determined. Rowan glanced sideways. A little girl stood beside his table, a tiny intruder in pink boots and a rumpled dress that swirled around her knees. Her cheeks were flushed the warm red of courage, one mitten clutching the remains of a cookie, crumbs daringly sprinkled across her sleeve. She looked at him with enormous gray-blue eyes, not fearfully but with gentle curiosity. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked. The question landed softly and yet struck like thunder. He blinked. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked him that. Not a doctor, not a colleague, not a friend pretending not to check their watch. For a moment, Rowan forgot to breathe. He began, but the words tangled. The little girl tilted her head. "You don't look okay," she said honestly. Then, as if sharing a secret fact, she added, "My mom says when people don't talk, it means they're sad inside." His lips twitched, the smallest echo of a laugh escaping him before he could stop it. It startled him, that sound. "Your mom sounds very wise," he managed. "She makes cookies," the girl said proudly, holding up the half-eaten one in proof. "Cookies help everything." It was such a simple answer for such a complicated truth that Rowan almost smiled again. "I'll remember that," he murmured. From the counter came a voice, feminine and gentle but laced with worry. "Mila, sweetheart, come here." The girl turned to look, but before leaving, she faced Rowan one last time, brow furrowing as seriously as if she'd been his doctor. "You should have a cookie, sir," she declared. "It'll help." Then she was gone, skipping back toward a woman crouched at the counter, the soft halo of her hair mirroring the child's. The woman gave Rowan a brief, apologetic smile, one polite and uncertain, the kind parents offer to strangers when their child has overstepped kindness's invisible boundary. Rowan returned the nod. He didn't mind. The intrusion had left a warmth lingering in his chest that his espresso couldn't provide. He looked at the empty seat across from him. 10 minutes ago it had meant nothing. Now it felt filled, with light, with innocence, with the reminder that not all concern must be earned. "Are you okay, sir?" The words echoed like a gentle bell inside his head. He exhaled, and something in the sound was human again. Outside, the clouds shifted, letting a blush of daylight slip through. It wasn't much, but for the first time in days, Rowan Thorne smiled, and meant it. By the time the girl returned to her seat, her mother hurried over, face flushed from embarrassment and the heat of the kitchen. Her hair was pulled into a messy knot, apron dusted with flour, the subtle badge of a morning's work. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, voice low but sincere. "She doesn't usually talk to strangers." Rowan looked up. "It's all right." His tone was even, quiet, a steady surface over deep currents. The woman hesitated. She recognized power, not from his suit, but from the way space seemed to bend slightly around him. Still, something about his composure didn't read arrogance. It read, wounded. Their eyes met briefly. There it was again. Not wealth or fame, but sadness, plain and unguarded. "I'll keep her from bothering you," she added softly. "You didn't need to," he said. She helped. The comment made her blink, uncertain whether she'd heard him right. She smiled faintly out of politeness and turned back toward the counter. Rowan's eyes followed her, not with entitlement, but gratitude he couldn't voice. He watched her lean down to her daughter, voice gentle but firm, smoothing wisps of blonde hair from the child's forehead. She had an ease to her movements, unpolished but real. An honest kind of grace that came from trying, not posing. At their table, Mila launched into a lively story, her hands drawing big shapes in the air, her voice rising then falling like music. Rowan couldn't hear the words, only the rhythm, the joy that children carried without knowing they carried it. At one point the girl turned and waved. He smiled before he knew he had. The woman, Ara Quinn, as he would later learn from a name tag half hidden beneath her apron, caught her daughter's motion and hushed her, cheeks coloring. Whatever she said made the little girl giggle. Across the cafe, time softened. A few minutes later, Ara passed behind the counter and paused at a small shelf near the register. She reached into a glass jar tucked half out of view, a jar meant for home, not for sale. From it she picked a cookie, round and imperfect. She placed it on a small plate, hesitated like someone negotiating with her own courage, then carried it toward him. Setting it gently before him, she said, "She told me to give you one. She says this one helps when you're sad. She might be right. It works for me sometimes," and without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away. Rowan stared at the plate. The cookie smelled of cinnamon, nutmeg, and something he couldn't name. Perhaps kindness itself. Its edges were uneven, its wrapping slightly crooked. It wasn't expensive or elegant. It was the most human thing anyone had offered him in years. He didn't eat it right away. He sat there, tracing the small swirl of sugar on its surface, feeling warmth seep into his cold hands from the ceramic beneath it. For once, nothing was expected of him. No deal to close, no performance to offer. Just a simple gift, expected to mean nothing, and therefore, meaning everything. He looked up. Across the room, Ara was busy refilling jars, stealing glances she thought he wouldn't notice. Mila was drawing on a napkin, tongue poking out in intense concentration. Probably another crooked heart or a smiling sun. Rowan felt something move inside him. Not the electric spark of attraction nor the ache of grief, but something quieter. Recognition. Someone else moving through life gently, carrying too much, pretending it weighed nothing. He hadn't realized how lonely he truly was until these two strangers saw him. Not the CEO, just him. That night, for the first time since the funeral, he slept. Rowan Thorne went back to the cafe the next morning. And the next, and the next. He never said much, just nodded to Ara, ordered black coffee, and claimed the same corner seat. Enough distance to remain unnoticed, close enough to hear Mila's laughter ripple through the room. Each day the little girl waved like greeting an old friend. Sometimes she brought him crayon drawings, cats with crooked tails, stars that burst beyond the paper's edge, smiling suns all signed in uneven letters. For Mr. Coffee Man. Rowan never corrected her. He tucked each small drawing carefully into his wallet, folded beside credit cards and business contracts, as if these scraps of color now mattered more than anything else he owned. At first, Ara stayed professionally distant, kind, not cold. But over time, she began to notice small things. How he quietly moved a chair aside so she wouldn't trip when her hands were full. How he waited patiently when the cafe was busy. Never impatient, never detached. He didn't ask for attention. He simply made room for her world to breathe. And in that quiet, Ara Quinn began to see. Not the millionaire in a suit. Not the lonely figure by the window. But a man who noticed far more than he ever said. On a rainy Thursday, the cafe was quieter than usual. Gray clouds hovered low, the streets slick with mist. Ara was in the back finishing a cake order. Mila played out front on the stone porch, spinning under fairy lights in her pink dress. Then came the sound, a soft thud, a startled cry. Rowan was already on his feet. In a few quick strides, he was outside. Mila sat on the wet stone, palms scraped, her dress speckled with dirt. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Rowan knelt beside her, wordless. He pulled a white handkerchief from his coat and gently wiped her hands. His movements were calm, careful. Then, from his wallet, he drew out a small metallic sticker. Gold, shaped like a star. He held it out. "Only the bravest kids get this," he said quietly. "Crying's okay, but brave ones always get back up." Mila sniffled, looked at him with solemn eyes and nodded. She took the sticker, then wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. That was when stepped out. She stopped in the doorway, cake box in hand, eyes fixed on the man holding her daughter like she was something fragile and important. Rowan didn't notice her at first. His attention was all on Ma, and when he did glance up, his eyes, usually guarded, held something unspoken, something gentle. Back inside, Rowan returned to his table. A few minutes later, Ara approached with a cup of hot cocoa and set it down in front of him. She said nothing, but beside the cup she placed a small cloth bundle. Inside a single homemade cookie, uneven, warm, fragrant. Tucked under it was a handwritten note. "Mila says, 'You're part of our kind friend club. Now we start with cookies.'" Underneath was a crooked little drawing, Mila in her pink dress, all with her yellow hair and a tall man with a gold star on his chest and a coffee cup in hand. Rowan stared at it longer than he meant to. Then, for the first time in years, something close to a smile tugged at his lips. Not the rehearsed kind from meetings. Something quieter, real. He slipped the note into his wallet, right next to Ma's other drawings. That night, the city glowed beneath Rowan's penthouse. But inside, everything felt still, hollow. He walked through the quiet space, past gleaming furniture and untouched art. The silence, once his refuge, now weighed heavier than ever. In his study, he opened a drawer. Rolex, cufflinks, titanium business card holder, all gleamed under soft light. But his hand passed them. Instead, he reached for the paper bundle, the drawing, the note. He held them in his palms, elbows resting on the desk, head bowed, breath shallow. And then a quiet thought slipped through the quiet. How did a pink dress and a cookie do more than a boardroom ever could? The weather had turned cooler. Early autumn leaves rustled along the cafe's windowsills, and the sunlight slipped in softer now, gentler. Like everything in Rowan's world since Mila and Ara appeared. By now, Rowan's presence had become part of the cafe's quiet rhythm. Never loud, never disruptive, just steady. Sometimes he'd arrive in the early morning, catching Ara as she opened the shutters, still rubbing sleep from her eyes. Other times, it was late afternoon when Mila was coloring napkins and had flour on her sleeve. But always, Rowan chose the table closest to the counter, always facing them. One morning, while waiting for his coffee, Rowan finally spoke not to Mila, but to Ara, who was wiping down the counter. "My mother used to ask me a question," he said quietly. "Even after I became CEO, she'd still ask, 'Are you happy?'" Ara looked up, hands stilling on the cloth. She didn't care about the stock price, never asked about company numbers, just that one thing. There was a pause. Rowan's hand toyed with a sugar packet he never opened. The grief in his voice needed no further explanation. Ara didn't rush to answer. She simply nodded. Somehow that was enough. Days later, the conversation deepened. They were closing together one evening. Mila had fallen asleep in the corner booth, a picture book resting on her chest. The radio played something slow and jazzy in the background. Ara glanced at her daughter, then at Rowan. Her voice came and prompted. "I almost gave her up," she said. Rowan turned slightly, listening. "Not forever," Ilara clarified. "Just for a while. When I found out I was pregnant, my fiancé said he wasn't ready. Walked out. I was 23, broke, working double shifts." Rowan didn't speak. He just listened. "I kept thinking maybe May deserved more. 2 parents, stability, someone better than me. But the moment I saw her, I knew I could give up everything except her." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes gleamed. She looked over at Mila, then back at Rowan. "I didn't hate him," she added. "I just hate that she'll never know what it's like to have 2 parents who stayed." A long silence followed. Not heavy, just real. Rowan finally said, "She has more than most. She has you." All met his gaze. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Later that week it happened. It was a Friday evening. The cafe buzzed with customers, cups clinking, the espresso machine hissing. A group of well-dressed patrons had arrived, loud, entitled. A birthday party, apparently. Ara remained calm, composed until one of them sneered. "Is this a daycare or a bakery?" Loud enough for others to hear. Ara's smile faltered. Moments later, she disappeared into the back. Rowan, standing by the register, noticed. Without hesitation, he followed. He slipped through the staff door and found her in the dim hallway beside the supply closet, seated on an overturned crate. Her head was bowed, hands wiping at her eyes quickly. She looked up, startled to see him. He didn't speak, just grabbed a water bottle from a nearby crate and set it beside her. Then gently, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a clean napkin. Ara took both. Her eyes were tired, red-rimmed but thankful. Rowan sat down opposite her, knees drawn up, arms draped loosely over them. For a moment, they just sat in silence, breathing the same air. Finally, Rowan spoke. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he said quietly. "Not here, not with me." Ara didn't respond. She didn't need to. In that cramped hallway, beneath the hum of the fluorescent light and the scent of cinnamon and coffee grounds, something softened between them. They were two people shaped by pain, by responsibilities too big and too soon, by people who left. But here, just for a moment, they weren't carrying it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something healing. The change was slow, so subtle in fact, that Aurora almost didn't notice it happening. But the signs were there, like quiet ripples on the surface of still water. One rainy morning, she arrived at the cafe, soaked through her sleeves, only to find a dark green umbrella propped by the back door. No note, no message, just a silent gesture. She glanced at Rowan's usual seat through the window. He was already there sipping his espresso, eyes on the rain. Another time, she caught him buying one of Ma's favorite cookies from the display, a ginger honey swirl that the girl rarely asked for by name, but always lit up at the sight of. No one had told him. No one needed to. Little things, quiet things, thoughtful in a way that had nothing to do with wealth or charm. For someone like Rowan Thorne, CEO, multimillionaire, a man who once operated on precise calculations and careful detachment, these gestures weren't just kind. They were deeply personal, intentional, and felt it, all of it. There were moments now when their eyes would meet across the room, and she would feel something stir in her chest that she hadn't let herself feel in years. A kind of nervous warmth, a flutter she tried to ignore. But Mila, in all her innocent wisdom, never ignored anything. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The cafe had been busy all morning, and was midway through a double shift. Mila, curled up in her corner seat with a blanket and storybooks, had been unusually quiet. Ara had chalked it up to a skipped nap, but by mid-afternoon, her daughter's cheeks flushed with a pink that was not from play. She was burning up. "Mila," Alara whispered, kneeling beside her and brushing her damp bangs aside. The little girl whimpered and leaned into her mother's chest. Her skin was hot. Oh no, she glanced around the cafe. No one else on shift could leave. The owner wouldn't be back until evening. Panic began to rise in her chest. She needed to get Mila to urgent care, but she couldn't leave the cafe unattended. Rowan stood up from his table. His gaze had already found hers before she could even ask. "I'll take you," he said without hesitation. All looked torn. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said gently. "Let me drive you." A few minutes later, they were in his car, sleek, silent, the scent of leather and pine filling the air. Ara cradled Ma in the back seat, whispering softly, trying to calm her. Rowan drove with one hand steady on the wheel, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds. Halfway through the ride, Mila stirred. She blinked up groggy at Rowan's reflection and mumbled, "You're my favorite grown-up." Rowan's eyes widened briefly in the mirror, his mouth opening just slightly, as if unsure how to respond. Ara, holding Ma close, felt something shift in her chest. He didn't laugh, didn't deflect. Instead, his voice softened. "That's a pretty big title, Mila." The girl nodded sleepily. "You give cookies and stars, and you help my mommy." Ara blinked hard, trying to keep tears from escaping. She looked toward Rowan, his profile lit by the late afternoon sun cutting through the windshield. He wasn't polished in that moment. Not the flawless executive, just a man with careful hands, gentle instincts, and a heart that had learned how to be soft again. She saw him not as the CEO of a company, but as a man who'd remembered the exact cookie her daughter liked, who kept star stickers in his wallet, who gave umbrellas and silence instead of flowers and compliments. Her breath caught. She had spent so long believing love came wrapped in grand gestures or big promises. But here it was, quiet, unspoken, resting in the space between small kindnesses and Mella's sleepy declarations. And in that car, with the city blurring past the windows and her daughter curled up safely beside her, Alara realized she wasn't afraid of Rowan Thorne anymore. She was beginning to fall. The peace they had found, quiet, fragile, and blooming, shattered in a single afternoon. It started with a letter. A thick envelope slid under Aller's apartment door, stamped with a law firm's logo. Inside was a formal petition for custody, and a name she had hoped never to see again. Colin Price. Her stomach turned. She hadn't heard from him since he walked out months before Mila was born. The same man who once whispered forever and vanished when forever became inconvenient. Now, years later, he had returned, not with regret, not with apology, but with cold threats wrapped in legal language. He wanted joint custody or full custody if she didn't comply. With the petition came a note written in quick, cruel ink. Take the settlement. Walk away, or I'll see you in court. Ara sat at the kitchen table, the papers trembling in her hands. Mila napped in the next room, safe in a world of pink blankets and bedtime stories, unaware of the threat looming just outside that door. Ara didn't sleep that night. Fear pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. But she said nothing to Rowan. Not that day, not the one after. He had already done too much. He had a reputation to protect, a business to run, and a life of expectations she couldn't burden. So, she smiled. She worked. She let Mila twirl in her sparkly sneakers and talk about her drawings, pretending the ground hadn't opened beneath her feet. But Rowan noticed. He saw the difference in her posture, the tightness in her laugh. He watched her hands tremble when she poured coffee. Her eyes no longer lifted when someone said her name. He didn't ask. Not at first. Then one late afternoon, passing the playground near the cafe, he saw her alone on a bench, face in her hands. Her shoulders trembled with silent sobs. She thought no one was watching. Rowan stood for a long moment, then walked over. Quiet footsteps, no fanfare. He sat beside her, offering a handkerchief and a bottle of water. Looked up, startled. Her mascara had smudged and her eyes were red. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Rowan didn't flinch. He didn't speak, just sat beside her, solid and silent. "You don't have to be," he said softly. She couldn't answer. Instead, she clutched the water, blinking away tears, and let the silence say what she couldn't. "I'm scared. I'm tired. I don't know what to do." That night, Rowan made a call. The next morning, a woman rang Alara's doorbell. Sharp suit, calm smile. "I'm a family attorney," she said. "I'm here on behalf of someone who believes in you. You owe nothing." Ara stared, papers still clutched in her hand. She didn't ask who sent her. She already knew. That afternoon, she found Rowan at the cafe. Same corner table, same quiet focus. She approached with a muffin she'd meant to give him earlier. "You did this," she said. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I just gave you a better sword," he replied. "You'll still be the one swinging it." "I didn't want to bother you," she said. "You didn't." His voice was steady. "But you're not fighting this alone." She hesitated, the weight of fear still clinging to her. "I'm afraid?" He nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "You protect her," he said. "Let me protect you even just a little." There was no grand promise, no dramatic vow, just that. A quiet offer of safety, of standing beside her, not to lead, not to fix, but to stay. And in that moment, something solid formed between them. Not obligation, not rescue, but trust. And for the first time in a long time, Allah felt what it meant to have someone in her corner. Not because they had to, but because they chose to. Because to Rowan, she wasn't a problem to solve or a distraction from success. She was a woman worth standing beside. The truth came quietly, but it didn't go unnoticed. Ara had always been perceptive, even when tired, even when her life felt like it was stitched together with coffee, lullabies, and the quiet strength of a mother who refused to fall apart. She noticed the timing first, the lawyer who arrived just when she was about to give in. The way the woman spoke, not like someone hired by chance, but someone delivering on a silent promise. And then the final piece, a note tucked into Ma's coat pocket after a quick visit to the bookstore with Rowan. The handwriting was his. The message, simple, for the bravest girl I know and the strongest woman. No name, no signature, but Ara didn't need one. The next morning, she found him at the cafe, seated by the window, a book open but unread. She walked over and placed a small paper bag beside his cup. "Apple cinnamon still warm," she said, steady but direct. Rowan looked up. A flicker of a smile appeared until he caught the seriousness in her eyes. He closed the book. "You helped me," she said. "The lawyer, the letter, that note." He didn't deny it. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rowan met her gaze. "Because I didn't want it to feel like I was stepping in to fix something you could already handle." "And you can. You did. Then why?" She asked again, softer now. He paused, then quietly. "It's not charity. I care not just about Mila, about you." Her breath hitched. No flowers, no grand gestures, just words, steady, unafraid. She didn't speak, not right away. Her fingers toyed with her sleeve. Then slowly she sat down across from him and reached out. Her fingertips brushed his knuckles. A light, deliberate touch. It was the first time she touched him without Mila between them. The first time it meant something more. Rowan turned his palm, gently holding her hand in return. That evening, he offered to take them for a walk. The air was crisp. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet as they strolled through quiet streets. Mila held Rowan's hand, pointing out pumpkins, and giggling at squirrels darting past. By the time they returned near the cafe, Mila was nearly asleep. Rowan lifted her easily, her arms limp as she nestled her head on his shoulder. Alara walked beside him, saying nothing. There was something about the way he carried her daughter. Effortless, secure, like it had never been a question, like it had always belonged to him. The street lamps blinked on, casting a soft amber glow. Rowan shifted his coat to cover Ma better, his free hand brushing against Arara's as they walked. Then Arara stopped. He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" She nodded. Her eyes glistened. "I used to think," she began, voice trembling, "I'd never be someone's home, that I wasn't soft enough or whole enough that no one would ever stay." He didn't respond. He just looked at her. Really looked. She glanced from his face to the sleeping child in his arms. Then, so softly it barely broke the silence, she whispered, "But maybe you are." They stood there for a long moment, 3 quiet figures beneath the street lamp. One asleep, one remembering, one just beginning to believe. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with thunder. Sometimes it simply stays. The day of the grand opening arrived beneath a soft autumn sky. Sunlight filtered through amber leaves lining the sidewalk outside the new public library. But this wasn't just another corporate project. Not to Rowan, not this time. The library stood tall in the heart of the neighborhood, its modern design softened by warm wood accents, cozy reading corners, and shelves already filled with donated books. Near the entrance, a plaque gleamed, a place to begin again, sponsored by Thor Medical Foundation. Families gathered, children laughing, neighbors chatting. Few realized the man behind it all had once sat alone in a cafe nearby, unnoticed. Rowan stood near the front, adjusting his sleeves as a local official wrapped up a brief speech. From the edge of the stage, Ara watched, one hand resting on Ma's shoulder. The little girl wore her favorite pink dress, twirling in place as she waited. As the applause faded, Rowan stepped up to the microphone. His voice was calm, steady, but something in his eyes had softened. "I built this place with the hope that no one would feel alone between these walls, that anyone, no matter their story, could find comfort, joy, or even just a moment of peace here." He looked out over the crowd, then down at Ma. "Sometimes the ones who show us how to rebuild aren't who we expect," he gestured gently. Mila's eyes lit up and she scampered across the stage toward him. Rowan knelt and pulled something from his coat pocket. A bracelet, pale rose-cold beads, with a silver heart charm. He fastened it around her tiny wrist. "This," he said softly, "is a promise that you'll always have me. Even when things are scary or confusing, even when it feels like no one sees you, I will." Mila beamed and kissed his cheek. The crowd smiled and laughed quietly. Then Rowan turned to Ara. She hadn't moved. Her hand was over her mouth, eyes glistening with emotion. He stepped toward her. "You walked into my life quietly," he said, voice low and full. "But you stayed loudly. Not because I asked, not because of who I am. You stayed because you cared. Because you saw someone no one else saw." He reached for her hands. "Will you walk the rest of it with me?" There was no hesitation, no doubt, only a quiet nod, and then tears. She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her close, careful not to disturb the now sleeping child against his shoulder. Applause rippled across the crowd, but neither of them seemed to hear it. Later, after the speeches and smiles faded, Rowan turned to her and simply said, "Let's go home." Not to the penthouse, not to his old world, but back to the cafe, back to where it all began. The evening sky had turned dusky blue as the 3 of them strolled down the sidewalk. Mila resting comfortably in Rowan's arms, Ara walking close beside him. They reached the familiar storefront, lights glowing warmly through the window, just as they had on that first day. A small handwritten sign hung on the door, cheerful red ink across cream cardstock. Aller's handwriting. "Home is not a place, it's the people who stay." And this time, none of them were walking out alone. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even the strongest need someone to truly see them, then you're already part of the soul-stirring stories family. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the hype button to support the channel. Every click helps us bring more stories of quiet love, real healing, and second chances to life. Because sometimes all it takes is a little girl in a pink dress to remind us what really matters. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.